Measure 110 was not very effective.
It's super easy for them. They have like their dealer on Snapchat and things like that.
Our brains aren't fully developed yet, so using that drug is going to stop that development.
Under Measure 110, Oregon became the first state to decriminalize the use of small amounts of almost all hard drugs for personal use. The measure intended to expand funding for and access to addiction treatment services. It uses tax revenues from the state's marijuana industry, as well as from expected savings from a reduction in arrests and incarcerations. But today, Oregon is experiencing an immense increase in drug addictions. Welcome to Kids Speak Out Oregon. I'm Barbara Harrison. Proponents of the new Oregon drug program think that the previous laws were punitive and not effective. What we have seen since the new law has taken effect, though, some point out, is a proliferation of drug dealers, needles everywhere, a rapid increase of deaths due to drugs, a significant rise in thefts, and a number of people on the streets high on drugs. But on the other hand, some people believe that legalizing drugs with the proper kind of treatment is a preferable way of doing it, as an alternative to incarceration. Does it need to be either or? What's the real answer? Let's meet the young people who are here to share their thoughts with us on the legalization of drugs in Oregon. Welcome to our panel, and why don't you introduce yourselves to our audience?
My name is Max. I'm 14 years old, and something that I really love to do is play gymnastics, or do gymnastics.
Okay, thank you, Max. EJ?
My name is EJ. I'm 14 years old. Something I like to do is play football.
Great.
Hi, I'm Hadley. I'm 10 years old, and I love to dance.
Great. Isaiah?
Hi, I'm Isaiah, and I love to wrestle.
Great.
I'm Cara. I'm 16, and one thing I love to do is travel.
I'm Arjun. I'm 16, and one thing I love to do is train in MMA.
I'm Jada. I'm 18, and something that I love to do is sing and dance.
Wonderful. We're so glad you're here with us. Everybody ready to talk about this subject that a lot of people in the state of Oregon are talking about right now. How effective do you think this program is? Hadley, what do you think?
Measure 110, the act that legalized certain drugs, was not very effective in Oregon. The intent was very well-meaning. However, when things got set up, it wasn't as effective.
Anybody agree with that?
I think that they had the good right intentions and all that, but the problem was they didn't have a good rehabilitation program going on. If you look at Portugal right now, Portugal in 2001, I think, they passed a bill which basically decriminalized, not legalized, but decriminalized all drugs. And what they saw with that was that they saw more people going to rehab and less overdoses and less deaths because of these drugs. And I think if we adopted a more similar system that Portugal did, because it's already worked, I think we'd see better results.
Yeah, because they say that the criminalization of drugs was not working, that people were being taken to jail. They had court cases that went after that cost a lot of money, cost the state a lot of money. And so decriminalizing was supposed to mean there would be money, maybe tax money, especially for marijuana, coming in to provide drug programs for people who were hooked on drugs. Max, what do you think?
I think that there needs to be like more help with like people who are on drugs, but I feel like that the stuff that we've been trying to do hasn't been very helpful.
Well, I want to ask this question, and it doesn't mean that you know this from personal experience, but how easy is it to get drugs in Oregon? How easy is it for young people like you?
You can get it really anywhere because of the environment that you're around.
You say you can get them? They're out there and easy to get?
Yeah.
Are there people on the streets who are offering you drugs to buy?
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere you can see it. They'll be at a bus stop. Hey, do you want this? Do you do this? And it's really just your decision to say yes or no.
How do you deal with that? Any of you? How do you deal with that when somebody comes up saying, you want to buy some of this?
Tell them no and kind of like put my headphones in and just ignore them.
And just keep moving?
Yeah.
And they don't usually follow?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. Hadley?
Going back to how it's easy to get drugs, now drugs are very easy to make in laboratories because they're using chemicals that even make drugs stronger. So you can buy drugs for $2. And what we see now is that people are getting like 20 a day. And to get this money, they're stealing and they're tricking the system just to buy drugs.
And anybody else notice that?
I don't know much about like actually getting drugs, because I haven't actually experienced that, but I know and I've heard about like friends of friends, things like that. It's super easy for them. They have like their dealer on Snapchat and things like that. And you see it all in schools. I don't know much about the streets, but in schools, especially in my school, if you go inside the bathroom, you can smell the weed, you can smell the vape. It's very common in schools and things like that. And it's really easy for the kids to get it because it's just on Snapchat. They have their dealer on Snapchat and things like that.
So at what age, even if you haven't experienced it yourself, at what age do you think kids start using drugs for the most part?
Well, I'm in middle school. I'm in 8th grade, and there's 6th graders at my school that are are getting hold of drugs that are like really easily. Like they can just hit up someone, and it's pretty sad because they're destroying their lives at such a young age when they could be, living their kid life.
Do you think that there's drug sales going on in school?
Sometimes there is, yeah.
Yeah, do you ever see that happening?
No, but I hear about it, and I sometimes talk to the people that are doing it. But I've never done any of that or engaged with it, but I do have some friends who have done that before.
And how do they generally approach a kid? How do they approach you? And do they just assume for some reason that you might be interested?
It's not always adults. It's kind of like kid-to-kid contact. That's really what it is. It's the kids who can get it from the people that they are living with, or they have connections, and they'll go to other kids and say, hey, you want to try this, or you want to do this, do that, because it's just money for them.
Well, how easy is it to say no? If it's somebody you know who's a friend and they say, hey, you want to try some of this?
Oh, peer pressure is very real. So I can see how some people may feel like they need to do drugs just because their friends do them. And I don't think that's the case because, it's destroying your body.
Go ahead,
I
Arjun.
have acquaintances and people at school that I know, and I've asked them before, why do you do this? Why do you smoke weed? Why do you vape? And the thing is, they think it's fun, and they don't actually realize the damage that it does to your body. Well, very recently, I asked one of my acquaintances, well, why do you do this? They were like, well, I do sports, so I'm healthy. And that's not really an excuse or anything. And they just think it's fun it's just a fun thing to do, and they don't really fully understand the damage this could do to you in the long run.
Do you think peer pressure has a lot to do with it? If somebody that you know offers you something, you don't want to say no because maybe their feelings will be hurt?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think especially in high school, drugs are a very social thing. And so if your friend is doing drugs and they're going to try to convince you to also do them just as a social thing. That's just
How
what
hard is it to say no? It's probably pretty hard, isn't it? Especially if somebody you like, so who's a
Yeah.
friend.
But I feel like we all have a voice, so we can all use our voice to reject it and tell them no. If they keep pushing you to do something, maybe that's not someone that you consider a friend.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point to make. Sometimes it's hard to walk away from somebody who you think is an important person at school.
I don't have any personal experience, but I can assume that those people selling drugs, that is where they're getting their money. And so when they approach you, that is what their lives depend on. And so it's really important to them, and it's really hard.
So they push pretty hard when they're
Yeah.
trying to get you to buy it. But suppose it was a friend. Suppose it was a friend who came up and said, you ought to try this. It's not going to hurt you. What would you say?
Well, I have seen firsthand, well, not exactly firsthand, but I'm educated on what drugs can do, and I think that I could have the power to say no.
But you feel like you know what can happen, so you have no problem saying no. EJ, how about you? Anybody ever try to push anything on you?
Yeah.
Tell me about it.
It was like I felt. It didn't feel good. I said no, but it was like I didn't want to lose that friend. So I wanted to say yes, but I said no because I didn't want to lose that friend.
no temptation to just see what it's like before you say no?
No.
No. What have your parents said about drugs to you?
They tell me that it's a bad thing because I'm a student athlete, so they tell me it's bad for my body. I shouldn't do it, and yeah, it's bad.
It's
Yeah.
great being an athlete and having that excuse to say to somebody, isn't it? Especially somebody who's a friend trying to get you to try something. Max, what about you? Any experience with people trying to get you to buy drugs?
Personally, a few of my friends have asked me to do drugs with them, but I've told them no. It's not very hard for me to say no to them because before becoming friends with me, they knew that I wouldn't do that. So normally they just rub it off because they know that I'm gonna say no, because they just know that I'm like that.
Can you put together enough of a friend group that you have your group that everybody knows would not touch drugs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I could
Yeah.
say so. I would definitely say like an influence on drugs comes from like different like mental things that teens go through. So like they use it as a distraction or to not feel the things that they go through in their lives. So that's probably a way that I've definitely seen it be prominent in an area.
Well, and of the kids that you know are doing drugs, are most of them doing okay in school?
For the most part, I feel like they do these drugs, but they also realize that it's more of a personal thing. They're not enforcing it on anybody else, and it's bad for them. But most of the time, the people I know, it isn't really affecting their school life because they're still young, and these implications that it has, these drugs, they won't realize it until much later. So they're still going to be doing fine in school, and social life might be fine. But then I'm sure they'll realize later when they mature and when they get older that this is bad for you, and it's actually going to have some implications on them.
So from your observations, how young do kids start using drugs?
Middle school.
As young as they want.
Middle school.
Well, middle school.
Yeah.
And the drugs are out there in the middle school. Do the teachers know it?
No. Some teachers do. They'll like speak up about it, or they just keep it to themselves. But I feel like the adults around you will know. But sometimes they'll turn their head to it, or they'll just think that you do it, but they don't want to accept that you do it.
I see. But no one has ever, that you know of, has ever been called aside by a teacher or principal or somebody at the school and say, we know what's going on, you got to stop this?
I feel
I
like
have.
You've seen that
it
happen?
before.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's good to know that somebody's keeping an eye on the kids. What about parents? Do you think parents are speaking out against drugs to their kids, and does it work?
Yeah, some of it. Like back to what EJ was saying. That's my best friend, so our parents are in like the same circle, so they give us the same talk because we're both student athletes, and they really do care about our future. But some parents, they do it themselves, so they don't see a problem with it.
Yeah, that
And so
could be a
that's what I
problem.
was saying earlier about how some of the kids provide it and then they want to go distribute it like how their parents were doing.
Yeah. Well, if you see your parents doing it, I guess it's easy to think it's okay. We're going to take a break and come back and finish this wonderful conversation. You guys are giving us, all of us, a lot of food for thought. We'll be right back. We're talking about drugs in Oregon and the new law that allows people to buy drugs that have in the past been illegal. Do most of you think it was a good idea to pass that law?
I would say that for me, in my opinion, I am supportive of the intent behind Measure 110, which was to help people who are drug abusers and sending them to recovery, which I think is really well-meaning. However, in the execution of the whole project, the government, you could say, put the cart before the horse, and they passed this law before they had the backup, like detox centers and rehabilitation centers, where they could send people.
Anybody know anybody who's ever been to one of these detox centers?
Yeah.
One of the few that there are, apparently, that exist so far. Anybody
Yeah.
know anyone? How did it go for them, Isaiah?
It's actually my uncle. It's rough for him. He'll go in and out, but he always ends up back on the streets.
That seems to be what happens with people who
Yeah.
begin.
I feel like sometimes they might not give enough help that the people need, and they just keep going back to it.
Well, maybe that's what you were saying, Hadley. Maybe they just weren't ready with the proper treatments for people who were being supposed to be helped. But do you think it was a good idea to try to make some money to raise funds so that they could set up treatment centers?
I do think it was a good idea, but like Hadley said, I don't think they were like fully ready to build those when they had placed the law.
Yeah, it's definitely a good idea, but you can't just get money off of these drugs if you're not actually going to have good rehabilitation centers or any systems in place or any infrastructure in place to help these people. Yeah, you can pass the law, you can get the money, but what are you going to do with the money is the question.
Adding on, I think that with the money, it's being just divided between the few detox centers that we have, and there's no system, and like there's no, they aren't working together to a bigger goal, and they're kind of just spending it in willy-nilly ways.
Well, so as a result of this Proposition 110, do you see more drug use? Do you think you see more people high on drugs around the streets?
Yeah.
You do?
Yeah.
So you think that it really is not working? That's your opinion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I started to ask you before, what age do you think most kids start using drugs, seriously using drugs?
I think they start in middle school, but then in high school, you definitely see a lot more. I don't know if nearby Jesuit High School, that whole street, it's just filled with vape shops, weed shops. So I feel like it's also being targeted towards kids as well. So when you have a high school and then right all around the high school is a bunch of places where you can get different types of drugs, you're obviously going to see increase in drug use within kids, right? So I think it's happening in middle school, but it's actually like being more popularized in high schools.
So which is the drug of choice, do you think, for high school and middle school kids?
Marijuana.
Marijuana.
Vape.
Marijuana.
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy to get.
Vapes especially are targeted towards kids because they have all these flavors and all these things that like the manufacturers think that kids want. So they specifically target kids because
Yeah.
that's
And do you
their-
think
that's their
parents
point.
thought that the vaping was not a bad thing? That vaping was okay, so kids were doing it even at home?
I don't think I feel like parents saying you can't do this isn't really going to stop the kid from doing it. Like, yeah, obviously, I feel like the parents are saying, yeah, they're discouraging it, but that doesn't mean the kids aren't going to do it. The kids are still going to go behind their parents' backs and do it without their parents knowing.
Yeah,
Are there
I feel like when a parent tells you you can't do something, it makes you want to do it more.
Yeah.
And I feel like the stricter the parent, the more sneakier the kid is.
That's real.
I've heard from my friends that some parents let them vape just because the parents think that it's not as bad as the other drugs. So if their kid's vaping and they're not doing the other drugs, then they feel like that's better. So they let their kids do it, which I've heard from my friends.
Well, when it first came out, vaping a few years ago, was it a serious drug, or was it just like a menthol or something like that?
It was advertised as better than smoking, but that's very misleading
Yeah, it
because
has way more nicotine than
Yeah.
people would think it would. That's why I don't think parents should be allowing their kids to do it, because it's just targeting their lungs.
What drugs do you think should be legalized, if any?
Well, I say the one that's legalized right now, which is marijuana. It's often used as a medicinal resource and can actually help people who need it. I don't think it has that big of an effect, but I do know that like for people that are my age and still like growing, our brains aren't fully developed yet. So using that drug is going to stop that development. And I don't really want to encourage it, but I mean, people are going to do what they want to do regardless. But it's just, it's going to slow you down. So you're not going to be able to do those things that you need to do at school to be successful.
Are there people out there to help you? Do you know who they are to help kids who have gotten into drugs? Where to turn?
That's part of the problem is here. There needs to be more places. There needs to be more centers and rehabilitations and detox centers.
Kind of disagree with that. For kids, I don't think they should be sent to rehabilitation centers because there's a lot of adults around them that are there to help them and they just don't see it.
What about more education? Should there be classes in school to start educating kids before they get to middle school
There-
about drugs?
Yeah.
There is a
There is.
class. Yeah, it's just nobody listens. Is the problem? They have it at the start of every other day. We have something called AT, and they teach like mental health type things and staying away from drugs and things like that. No one's listening.
No.
Yeah.
Well, how could we make that change? How could you make people, could they be tested? Could they have to take a state test? And I don't mean a test to see if they're using drugs, but to see if they know all the answers, if the education is working.
I feel like the answers are obvious. So like just don't like they're pretty obvious. Like don't do drugs, stay away from things like that. But that's not going to stop people from actually doing it because they know all the right answers. They just choose to ignore them.
Do you feel that legalizing drugs makes it really more appetizing to those people who might be interested in taking them?
I think that's the difference, legalization versus decriminalization. Legalization is just allowing it, it's legal, right? Decriminalization is it's not legal. You can do it, but you won't be criminalized for it. You'll have like civil penalties such as fining or like sent to rehab. What Oregon is doing is legalizing, right? So we can't, when legalizing it, we're encouraging it. We don't want to do that. We want to decriminalize it, which means it's still looked down upon, and we also are getting help for the people that are doing it. So that's the key issue that's happening, legalization versus decriminalization.
Really
You
good
agree with
point.
that, Kara?
Yeah, I think adding on to the education thing, not only should the government be funding rehabilitation centers, but they should also put more money into education programs and preventative education so that people don't get into that in the first place.
So you think every student in high school
Yeah.
should have to take a preventative class?
Yeah.
It's a good idea. Isaiah, what do you think?
I think they all have good points in that we are educated, and like he said, we just don't listen. So it's kind of like,
So they're trying. They're
Yeah.
trying to teach kids, but many are not listening.
yeah.
All right, do you agree with that, Max?
Yeah, I've like some people, like if you try to help some people, they might not even want your help because they don't care what like the drugs do to their body because they're already like depressed and like they could be suicidal. So like even if you try to help them and educate them, they still might not even care because they don't care what happens to them.
Do you think that kids are willing to go to their parents to talk about it, or do parents bring it up with their kids on a regular basis, do you think?
Parents bring it up with
Yeah.
their kids on a regular basis.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
your parents have had a talk with you about what not to do.
Yeah,
And your
what not.
coaches too,
Yeah.
obviously.
To add on to like the class part where they're having like a class or whatever, I don't think telling the kids or in schools to not do drugs is going to help anything. It's more of restricting like how they're going to access these drugs is a better idea because you can't give it the option to kids. Some kids are probably going to choose the bad options because we're still growing, we're still in high school, we're still making mistakes. So instead of like teaching like stop doing drugs, which everybody knows it's the obvious answer, restrict how they're going to access it instead because that's a better idea because then they won't even have the option to even try these drugs.
Good point.
Feeding off of what he's saying, I think that they should highlight the consequences that come with drugs. You know, there's death. And then also feeding into like the homeless issue. I'm not saying that all homeless people are on drugs or whatever, but usually there's something going on mentally with that person and then they, tend to the drugs. So like it's always this cause and effect type of thing that goes on. And it's just a cycle. So like being located in Oregon and then seeing all these homeless people just tripping out on drugs and just doing a whole bunch of random stuff should be a big message to show you where you can end up.
And the numbers of homeless, do you think that has a lot to do with the drugs in this state?
Yeah. Going off of what Jada was saying, that when houseless people are doing drugs or when they are not in a stable mental state, it's hard for them to know what they're doing is negatively affecting their body, and they're not even, and sometimes not even in the right state to ask for help, and that's what is happening. is that when we're legalizing drugs, the point is to get more people to help, but that's tricky because if you're going to legalize it, there's a lot of steps to make sure legalizing is still safe and still has the impact that you want, and there aren't loopholes.
Everybody agree with that?
Yeah.
So how do you guys feel about the law? Should it be changed back? Should people be sent to jail for using drugs that were once illegal? Vote on this?
I really appreciate his distinction between decriminalization and legalization, and it's just something that really like kind of opened my eyes to see the difference as well. And I do think that the law needs a little bit more tweaking and adjustment.
Yeah.
Everybody agree?
Yeah.
Anybody agree? Wow, well, we're ending this panel in a good way. We all seem to be thinking the same way, and I am so grateful that you all joined us to talk about this, because this is something people are talking about all over the country. Is it working in Oregon? Would it work anywhere else? So thank you. This has been a great panel. Our panel has given us some important insights into the issue of drug legalization. Ideally, the plan was that Oregon would have programs in place to help those people on their journey to live healthier lives. Observers say we have yet to see this outcome realized.